The Dallas Cowboys will be keeping a close eye on several intriguing prospects at the NFL Combine. We're going to tell you who those players are in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Cowboys. Locked On Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, the NFL Combine is underway. We've got drills and testing starting on Thursday. And our first mailbag question is from Dustin. He wants to know, what players should Cowboy fans be keeping a close eye on this week?
There's tons, right? I mean, I think, there's a couple of guys, and there's lots of different reasons to be kind of keeping eyes on this, and whether it's measurables, testing. I mean, I think that, there's lots of storylines to follow here. Here's a couple of guys that I have my eyes on, because really what I'd like to get first is some good measurements on some of these folks. And I think for me, I have a couple of guys. I'm just going to rattle off a couple of guys.
Go ahead.
And I think for me specifically, I have offensive line questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to see where Graham Barton and Cooper Beebe measure in arm length. That's one thing that I'm interested in, because I do think that there's been a lot of talk about Graham Barton being obviously an interior guy, and it's kind of a foregone conclusion, and a lot of it has to do with his length. So I'd like to see exactly where he is on that, and I think Cooper Beebe, I was listening to Dane Brugler the other day, and he put the over-under on Cooper Beebe's arm length at 32 inches, and that scares me, man. Even with his great tape, even with his play style and his attitude, that's still pretty short. And so I think he is obviously a guard only, an interior guy only. I think that's pretty clear based on his play as well. But those are things to watch. I think Jordan Morgan's another guy that I think maybe even more so than those two, that like, he's a tackle. He's still being considered as a tackle. There's been whispers about him potentially being moved into guard, but that's because of his length, right? So I want to see what he measures in at. I want to see, what his length is, and I think that's going to kind of dictate a little bit more, not only what position he might play in the NFL, but where he gets drafted, and if he's potentially someone that the Cowboys could reach out and get. And then real quick, two more athletic guys. On the offensive line, Tyler Guyton and Amarius Mims, just because those two are freaks of nature, and we want to see how much. They're both really inexperienced players. I mean, some a little bit more, I think Guyton with a little more starts than Mims, but I think that right now you view both of those players as, athletic upside guys. Let's see how freaky they are, right? Like, I think that's the exciting thing. And then one more guy that's outside of the offensive line. I know I focus mostly on them, but those are the guys I like to look at. Just because of his position, and where he's being drafted, I'm interested in the testing of Kool-Aid McKinstry, right? Because we know about his teammate. We know Terrian's going to blow this thing up. He's going to look great. He's the top corner in the draft by most, by most rankings and most folks. McKinstry's a guy that I've been following since high school. Like, he's a highly touted recruit. Came in, was one of the few freshman starters on the Alabama defense that does not start freshman defensive backs, not for Nick Saban. And look, he kind of got overtaken by Taryn and the other corner on the Alabama defense, but he's still an incredible talent. I think he's still a top of the second round, bottom of the first round talent. And I think testing is really going to be the big marker, because that's the knock on him is he the same kind of athlete that you want at the position? So I think it's going to be a really big testing day for him this weekend.
Yeah, you hit on all the guys that I wanted to mention. I'll just go through a couple. No, it's great. This is awesome. Jordan Morgan's interesting. The Cowboys loved Matthew Bergeron last year. They were considering taking him at 26. I think Jordan Morgan's a better player. but where you fit in a tackle that's probably a guard in the NFL with Tyler Smith and Zach Martin, both on the roster for 2024.
Mhm.
It's interesting, but I want to see how long Morgan's arms come in because maybe he can stay at tackle and just how athletic he is. Amarius Mims is another one. One of the drills to keep an eye out for him isn't actually like a testing one. It's when they do that mirroring drill. You know what I'm talking about, where they kind of have to slide back and forth. I just want to see how he moves out there. I expect him to look really good. Moving on from some different players, to me, one of the positions that I've had a really hard time breaking apart is the running backs, right? Like, we're gonna quote our friend Dane Brugler a lot. He has no running backs in his top 69 players in this draft, but I believe he has 7 between picks 70 and 100. I think this is where these guys are going to start to separate themselves a little bit. I want to see how fast Bucky Irving runs the 40-yard dash. I want to see what kind of freak Braylon Allen really is.
What's his weight? Is he going to be under 235 pounds? Is he going to be over, especially if he's running the 40? It's interesting to see exactly what his weight is coming into the college.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping he cuts a little bit of weight. There's no sense of him playing at 245 pounds like he did last year. Get down to the 230-ish range, and I think I get even more excited. And then just the linebackers. I have my doubts that the Cowboys are actually going to take a linebacker high in this draft. But, Junior Colson from Michigan, I want to see what he comes in at. I want to see how athletic he is. Those linebackers, kind of like the running back position, I'm having a hard time separating them from one another. I think the combine is going to be the first time where maybe we start to see a few of these guys separate themselves from the pack.
Yeah, I think you nailed it too. Running back and linebacker is a spot where I'm still really, we've just kind of gotten into this, but the kind of cluster buster idea, right? Like you have all these guys kind of grouped together similarly. Where do you parse them? What's the difference in their games, and where do you find kind of advantages versus disadvantages of these players? It's tough, and I think at running back especially, right, because you have so many different flavors of running back, right? So many different types. Linebackers, it feels like it's funny how like over the years linebacker has gone from this position where you did have a wide variety of athletes, right? The Sam linebacker on the line guy. There was a time when you were still considering 3-4 outside linebackers as linebackers, and then all the way down to the small will linebackers. Now they're almost all exclusively this kind of middle between Mike and Will linebackers, like 230 to 230. Oh, really? No, I'm sorry. 220 to 200 and let's say 33 pounds usually is kind of the average range for linebackers now. So but it's hard to separate them, so let's see a little bit more about the athletic testing. Maybe that kind of helps you get some daylight between these guys.
I'm also keeping a close eye on the edge rushers. I know we haven't talked about that as like a big need for the Cowboys,
but it could be.
But it could be like with DeMarcus Lawrence's contract expiring after 2024, with Dorrance Armstrong being a free agent, with Dante Fowler being a free agent, with Micah Parsons maybe playing more stand-up linebacker over the A-gap. Maybe the Cowboys would be more interested in grabbing a Darius Robinson from Missouri or a Chop Robinson from Penn State should they fall to them. It's just one of the spots that I'm always looking to see which of these guys just tests off the chart. Keep an eye on those. Lana, I want to talk about some of the numbers at the combine because we have new listeners that this might be their first combine or they're just curious what drills actually matter for each position. Let's dive into that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. I love betting on the futures market. I love betting on who's going to make the NBA play-in game, who's going to make the playoffs. Listen, we've got no football for the next however many months. Go bet on some NBA basketball while you're sitting at home. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you'd do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you go for a run? Would you take a nap? Would you read that book that you've been meaning to get to? A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to find out what's really important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Just visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked on. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available in the free Fire TV channels app. Landon, our next question comes from Goran. He wants to know which numbers matter the most and for which positions.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's something that we've kind of been honing over the years and changing depending on the position and how it's getting measured and who's playing the position and how the position is being played. But I think there are a couple of numbers that have kind of, test numbers, like thresholds that you have kept with you this whole time. I think you start with some of the easier ones, right? Like for positions where you need explosion, the 10-yard splits from the 40-yard dashes, those are important. So for like pass rushers, wide receivers, I think running back, I still think offensive line too. Like some of these positions, like offensive line, getting that kind of 10-yard initial burst is a really good measurement of useful explosiveness. Now, listen, here's the thing. All these guys all are being trained as track athletes during this offseason. So they're improving on their explosiveness, but we're keeping that all in mind, right? Like because everyone's training to do this, the proportions are relatively still the same, right? So I think that that's something to keep in mind. If you're going to dive in a little deeper into some more of the inside baseball, I think the two that I like, associate the most or I watch the closest with, for me, are the 3-cone for pass rushers, for defensive ends specifically, right? I think that gives you a really good measurement of the ability to operate in space. It measures explosiveness and change of direction. That's really important when you're trying to get around a tackle in the NFL. And the guys that have, usually under I forgot to give numbers for the 10-yard splits, but usually you're looking for something in the for the 3-cone, like under, I can't remember if it's
like
under
7,
9.
It's usually
under
like
7.
Under 7 for pass rushers, and usually for receivers it's the same thing. You want them to be under 7.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the threshold you're looking for. And then the other big one that I really buy into, and this is one that Josh Norris pointed out a couple years ago, is it's the offensive lineman and the short shuttle. There's only been, I think, something like less than 30 offensive linemen since 2010 that have posted less than is it a 4.47 or is it a 4.45?
It's 4.5. It's 4.5.
Just a 4.5 flat in the short shuttle. So yeah. And what that does is that it really helps you, especially with these big guys, it helps you kind of measure their ability to, when you're doing the short shuttle, I think more so than the 3-cone, you really have to kind of get low in order to completely change direction. So I think it helps measure some of the flexibility and athleticism that's involved at the position. Either way, it does seem to be a pretty incredible indicator because all those, not all of them, but most of those 28 or whatever it is players that have managed to beat that threshold have ended up becoming very good offensive linemen, not just pretty good, but very good. So that's a nice threshold as well.
If you're not familiar with the short shuttle, it really is. It's basically you're standing on a line, you run to one line, touch the line, run past the midpoint, touch the other line, and come back. You have to really, you're mentioned, like, you have to get low to touch that line, right? Where as the 3-cone drill, that's a little bit more of a straight line drill. I mean, you're still weaving in and out of the cones, but you could be a little bit more stiff and do well on that drill if you're just extremely fast. The short shuttle does measure how quickly you can kind of get in and out of breaks. So that's why that one matters a lot. The other one for me, Landon, is the 40-yard dash when it comes to DBs. If you can't run, you just can't play in the NFL. I posted this chart from, I think it's since 2010, like the history of cornerbacks that run like a 4.62 or worse. There's one hit out of, I think, 175 players, and it's Josh Norman. Like, that's it. It's very, very rare that you find slow cornerbacks. And then even more so, if you look at like the Pro Bowl and All Pro caliber corners, almost none of them are running slower than a 4.45. So that's just a position where speed matters a lot. You don't have to run a 4.31, but you better not be in the mid 4.5s either.
And on the other side of it is, you could be a pretty bad corner, but if you run a 4.26 and you're at the combine,
you get drafted.
You're probably getting drafted. Yeah. So speed really, really is important at the cornerback position in a way that it's not anywhere else.
And just a couple tips and tricks for the combine, because you and I have been doing this for a long time now. I generally, before a player like will run a 40-yard dash, I'll try to in my brain have like a range. Okay, like I think he's going to run a 4.48 to a 4.53. And if it's wildly different than somewhere in that range, I think that's when you go back and you watch the tape. Like if I think a receiver is a 4.5 guy and he runs a 4.38, you go back and watch it. Or if it's the other way, if he runs a 4.61 and I thought he was a 4.48, go back and check the tape. I think that's generally the best way to watch.
Don't double count the numbers, right?
No.
Like if he's a fast guy and he runs a 4.3, don't be surprised. If he is a technique guy that is just fast enough, don't be disappointed when he runs a 4.6. I think you're right. I think the thing that you're looking for is the outliers, the surprises, right? Like you have in your mind a like you said, a number for these guys. You know how they play. Really, you kind of watch a couple of games and you understand their speed relative to the other athletes around them. So this is really a large, especially the 40 is a large just confirmation process, right? You're just going in there to confirm your priors on what this guy's play speed is and then measure it against traditional norms, right?
Now, you're just checking boxes more than anything.
Yeah, you're just checking boxes. If he falls outside of that, if he doesn't meet that speed, you need to go check for a couple of reasons. You need to check to see, hey, is this guy not as fast as his tape indicates? Is there? Am I being fooled by smart technique and knowing, anticipating where to go, and so it looks like he's moving faster on the field than he really is? Or is it a case that he's not preparing the way he needs to for the combine? And that's a whole other set of things, right? And then the other side of it too is that if you got a guy who you expect to be a 4.5 athlete and he comes out and runs a 4.32, you kind of need to go back and see, well, why don't I see that on tape? Like why don't I see that 4.3 speed on tape? Is it the opposite? Is it he doesn't have the technique? He's not trusting his eyes. Is it a mentality thing that he's not reacting fast enough, and that's why we're not seeing his speed? So really, it's I think when I first started watching the combine, when we all first started watching the combine, it's like you want to see the big numbers, you want to see the speed, and you're just kind of, seeing who is the fastest guy, and then you go watch that guy. Now, the more obviously advanced you get into this draft stuff, you've seen all these players, you've seen a lot of these players, right? You have an idea in your head of what the standard should be for what they are running. And if they fall outside of it, that's when you need to go back and kind of rewatch the tape, figure out exactly what you missed, or potentially figure out what they missed or what they're doing wrong so that they aren't testing quite to what, the tape shows you they should be testing.
Yeah. I also want to point out that I think as a whole, the football Twitter or whatever you want to say has gotten smarter when it comes to evaluating these players because of resources like RAS, which is the relative athletic score. Shout out to our guy Kent, who will adjust your athleticism based on your weight. Because if you have a running back that's 179 pounds and he runs a 4.4 flat, that's not as impressive as Braylon Allen at 245 pounds running a 4.44, right? So that has helped a lot. And for me, it's helped when it comes to eliminating prospects, right? Because a lot of times you watch these guys and maybe you really like the tape, but if their athleticism just comes in like the 10th, or 15th percentile, it's really hard to draft those guys high. Like I'll give you an example. I know a guy, Rashawn Golden, who was a defensive back from Tennessee that a lot of people liked coming in. I think it was like 2017, maybe something around, maybe 2018. A lot of people liked his tape, tested as a 9th percentile athlete, gets drafted in the, I think, 2nd or 3rd round by the Panthers. He's out of the league in 2 years because he just doesn't have the athleticism. That doesn't mean that you should only draft elite athletes, but the guys that test really poorly are the
Thresholds.
ones you should get concerned about.
You're looking for outliers, both good and bad,
Yes.
right? Like, and you need to note them and then decide what to do with them at that point. Absolutely.
Yeah. So just
real quick,
go ahead.
Make sure you guys, just because you plugged him too, Kintley Platt, his Twitter account is @MathBomb. You guys make sure you follow him because those RAS numbers are really, really great kind of indicator of how to put it all, how to fit all of it together and put it in a historical perspective.
You'll see his name on Twitter like all weekend long. So give him a good follow.
Yeah.
He's absolutely fantastic. All right, Landon, let's talk about running backs because do the Cowboys already have their 2nd round pick made in Jonathan Brooks? We'll discuss that next. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are answering your Twitter questions, and this final one comes from Brandon. He wants to know, have the Joneses already made their choice to draft running back Jonathan Brooks from Texas in the 2nd round, considering that Dr. Cooper did his ACL surgery?
No. No, they haven't chosen anybody in the 2nd round yet. They're still on the clock for the 1st round pick. I understand the snarkiness, and I understand the
good question.
The kind of assumption that this has already been made because of Cooper did the
well, it is it's a day 2 guy with
it's a 2nd round pick specific more than anything, right? Look, I do think it makes some sense. Look, Jonathan Brooks is, probably the top running back in the NFL draft this year.
Probably.
Or at least certainly in the conversation, right? I mean, obviously the ACL is an issue that he's having to overcome, but I think that you look at the kind of historical facts and you think, oh, Jonathan Cooper did the surgery. He's a Texas running back. Cowboys need a running back. The Cowboys have a 2nd round pick, so it's like all these things that seem to line up. Right? Yeah, exactly. So all these things that seem to line up, right? I think, is Brooks someone that they'll consider? Absolutely. I think they will. But I also think that, you look at that list, and I'm just looking at the NFL Combine Tracker right now. And you mentioned it with Dane saying, I think that, he had seven players ranked within 20 picks or something like that. Mm-hmm. Like after 70, 70 to the 90 or something like that. I mean, I'm looking at this list right here that Lane Zerling puts together on the NFL site, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 running backs that have a grade between 6.1 and 6.9 on this list. There are between 6.19 and 6.10. There are 11 running backs. Yeah. So the point is that there is clearly a sweet spot for running backs, and I think it is kind of the third round, like the third and fourth round. If you're gonna want to get the top guy, if you think Jalen Wright's the top guy, if you think Jonathan Brooks is the top guy, you're probably gonna have to get him at the end of the second round. But otherwise, you're gonna be in a fantastic buyer situation in the third round if you want to get a running back, because you'll probably, even at the bottom of the round, you'll probably still have your choice between Estime, Irving, Shipley, Corum, like any one of these kind of second tier running backs, which it extends, through the fourth, fifth round potentially.
yeah.
So I understand the kind of connecting the dots there, and we do that a lot around here, obviously. And I think there is very legitimate reason to do that with some of the stuff, especially the second round and Jonathan Cooper stuff. I mean, it's hard to argue against all that. But I think logically speaking, the Cowboys understand that they have holes that they need to fill. Starting running back is probably one of them, but they can still get that guy, a very, very good version of that guy, in the third round, with where there is going to be very good picking.
I will also say, when it comes to drafting Jonathan Brooks, it probably depends on what they do in free agency. Like if they only bring back Rico Dowdle, and it's Rico Dowdle and Deuce Vaughn and Hunter Lipke, I actually think that makes it less likely they draft Jonathan Brooks, because you remember he had the ACL surgery. I mean, the expectation is that he's going to be ready for training camp. I just don't know if the Cowboys are going to feel like we can draft a running back in round 2 if we don't have any other veteran option. But if they go out and they sign DeAndre Swift to a 1-year deal, maybe it does make it a little bit more palatable to draft a running back in round 2 coming off an ACL. If you're like, hey, we know he's not going to be ready for a big workload in the first month of the season, but by October, November, we'll be fine. One of the hard parts about this is because the Cowboys draft is at 56 and then late 80s. You are worried about that run of running backs happening like between your second and third round picks. So maybe they want to get ahead of it a little bit. I'm just not convinced that Brooks is going to be the clear-cut RB1 by the time we get to the draft. I think you're going to have 2 or 3 running backs at the combine this week, Landon. Sorry, I was talking to Elliot Harrison about
the same thing.
I think you're going to have 2 or 3 running backs that break out. And because Jonathan Brooks isn't testing,
he's probably not one of them.
What if Braylon Allen just goes ridiculous and runs a 4.38 at 240 pounds? Like, we're going to have a conversation about it.
Yeah. I mean, look, if anything, that just kind of further proves the point that there are a lot of these guys, and maybe that they're better than, we even anticipate where they are right now. I tend to agree. I actually think that one of the points that was made is actually working against him being picked, and that's the injury. And you mentioned, like, okay, I understand that we know the guy that did the surgery. He's our guy, but at the same time, it's like it's still drafting a running back that is recovering from an injury. So it's great that you have insight into that, but I'm not overdrafting that guy just because I know about his injury, or you know what I'm saying. So I tend to think that you still need to worry about the value of where you're taking this running back. And especially since you don't have a 4th round pick, like, you kind of need to make sure that you get what you need to get in those first 2 picks, and then, have patience and take the running back in the third.
Again, this is a big week for these running backs. I got to believe that 1 or 2 of these players are really going to show out at the combine. And maybe by the time we get to mid-March, it won't be Jonathan Brooks as the clear-cut running back 1. Maybe it will be Bucky Irving or Trey Benson or Braylon Allen or Audric Estime or Jalen Wright. I mean, it's just a bunch of running backs.
Blake Corum, Will Shipley, Isaac Guerrero.
That's the thing is, like, this is where the combine is going to start to separate these guys. Yeah. So just pause on the Jonathan Brooks hype right now. We'll talk about him as we get a little bit closer to the draft. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. We will see you right back here tomorrow.